Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation.
So it is Tuesday, August 18th, 2026, and tomorrow is honestly going to be a massive day.
Oh yeah, massive is an understatement.
Right, because tomorrow, a huge structural shift in North American trade logistics actually goes into effect. And our mission for today's deep dive is to basically unpack this giant stack of expert logistics and trade reports we've been looking at.
And there is a lot of data to get through.
There really is. We're going to be looking at this unprecedented convergence of tariff surges, some really volatile freight patterns, critical operational risks in LTL shipping, and the new Gordie Howe International Bridge.
Which is completely reshaping the physical landscape of trade.
It really is. But before we get into all that, I do want to throw out a quick neutrality disclaimer.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, because our sources today obviously detail actions taken by the U.S. executive branch, along with policies from various other governments. And we just want to be super clear that we are looking at this strictly from a neutral position. We aren't taking any partisan sides here.
Right. We're just reporting the facts.
Exactly. Just the logistics and the supply chain realities that are actually contained in the data. So let's start with the catalyst driving all this current chaos.
The tariffs.
Yes. So on July 20th, 2026, the U.S. administration invoked Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930.
Right.
And they used it to impose a 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion in Canadian imports.
Which goes into effect tomorrow, August 19th.
Exactly. And to put that into perspective, that impacts about 5.2% of the $383 billion that the U.S. imported from Canada back in 2025.
Yeah, it's a huge chunk. And the invocation of Section 338 is really what fundamentally alters the risk profile here.
Why is that exactly?
Well, it's an archaic Depression-era statute. We haven't really seen it used like this in modern history. And the key thing is it lacks all the statutory domestic checks that are embedded in modern trade mechanisms.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there is no U.S. International Trade Commission investigation required.
Wait, really?
No mandatory review period at all. The administration essentially deployed it as an immediate tariff button after the Supreme Court invalidated their use of the IEPA back in February of 2026.
Wow.
And because they leveraged this specific 1930 statute, these tariffs apply regardless of whether your product qualifies for preferential treatment under the USMCA.
So the whole USMCA tariff-free guarantee is just gone.
The compliance shield is entirely gone, yeah.
Wait, let me unpack this. So an obscure 1930s law allows the executive branch to just sidestep a massive modern treaty like the USMCA overnight. Doesn't that completely destroy the basic premise of free trade agreements for multinational companies?
It absolutely does. I mean, that is the biggest operational risk for corporations right now. They can no longer rely on that predictability. It's a permanent shift to a highly volatile regulatory environment.
That is wild. And when we dig into the three specific presidential proclamations taking effect tomorrow, the strategy behind it becomes really apparent.
Oh, yeah, it's very targeted.
Take the Motor Vehicle Proclamation. It covers 439 separate classifications. But there are actually 0 vehicle lines targeted.
Right. No finished cars.
None. Instead, it surgically targets downstream industrial components. Agricultural machinery, or there's this specific refrigerating machinery under HTS 8418.69.01.
Yeah, the industrial cooling systems. It's designed as a supply chain chokehold. It forces maximum pain on the manufacturing floor without necessarily hitting the consumer showroom immediately.
Right. And then you layer in the Dairy Proclamation. That one targets 52 lines, including milk, whey, and, curiously, peppermint oil.
Yeah, peppermint oil got caught in the crossfire.
But that all stems directly from long-standing U.S. grievances over Canada's cheese quotas, right? Because they heavily favor the EU.
Exactly. And then you have the Alcoholic Beverage Proclamation, 63 lines from beer to wine to, and this one is pretty funny, ice hockey equipment.
Ice hockey equipment.
Yeah, it's direct retaliation against Canadian provincial retail restrictions. They know where it hurts.
That is just incredible. And all of this is coming to a head just as the formal 6-year joint review of the USMCA kicked off last month in July.
Right, which did not go well.
No, it didn't. The U.S. declined to extend the agreement for another 16-year term. So now we're triggered into these high-stakes, volatile annual reviews all the way through 2036.
Which is a nightmare for logistics managers trying to plan against a stable horizon.
So let's talk about how the market actually reacted to this over the summer. Because with that August 19th deadline hanging over everyone, shippers basically engage in this massive tactical inventory front-loading.
Yeah, panic sourcing.
Exactly. And the data from July completely warps historical freight patterns. Canadian load volumes jumped 41% year over year.
But the really crazy metric is the month-over-month drop. Volumes actually fell 7% from June.
Because physical warehouse capacity was entirely exhausted.
Right.
So what we're seeing is basically the corporate equivalent of panic buying groceries before a blizzard. Everyone rushed the aisles in the spring, and by July, their pantries or their warehouses were so full they physically couldn't buy more.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy. The supply chain basically swallowed as much as it could until it literally choked. And it created this massive directional imbalance.
How so?
Well, inbound freight, so loads moving from the U.S. into Canada surged 46% higher than July 2025.
Wow, 46%.
Yeah. Canadian importers were aggressively front-running potential domestic shortages. They were stockpiling U.S. raw materials. But since the static warehouse space was maxed out, they started using the transportation network itself as rolling storage.
Or just keeping stuff on trucks.
Pretty much. Inter-Canada domestic freight became the primary buffer. It was up 41% year over year, making up 41% of all postings. Companies were frantically moving inventory across Ontario just to find an empty dock door.
And securing the trucks to do that comes at a huge premium. The truck-to-load ratio in July 2026 sat at 2.71.
Which is really low.
Yeah, that is a 29% drop from the 3.83 ratio we saw in July 2025. So carriers have immense pricing power right now.
They absolutely do. But, the so what of all this front-loading is that it didn't actually solve the underlying supply chain threat.
Right.
It just shifted the bottleneck from origin warehouses directly to the physical border crossings.
Which brings us to the operational reality at the border, specifically for less than truckload, or LTL networks.
Right. And LTL is growing fast, about a 3.84% compound annual growth rate.
Yeah.
But its inherent structure makes it uniquely vulnerable here.
But with a full truckload, it's just a clean single origin to single destination move.
Exactly. But LTL relies on multi-stop consolidation. Freight passes through regional cross-docks, it mixes with other shippers' pallets, it shifts between different trailers. There's just a lot of friction.
And then you add the macro constraints on the driver pool itself. The median driver age is 47 in the U.S. and 49 in Canada.
Yeah, it's an aging workforce.
Plus, you have strict 11-hour driving limits. So carriers are increasingly forced to use dual-driver teams just to maintain these cross-border schedules.
Which the data shows is driving line haul costs up by as much as 30%.
Just from having a second driver in the cab.
Yep. And those expensive line hauls are hitting severe regional gridlock, especially at the Buffalo, New York gateway.
Yeah, the reports mentioned really extended border dwell times there.
And as we move into the fourth quarter, you have the winter risk multiplier.
Oh, right. The weather.
Yeah. Heavy carriers run at about 90% utilization just to keep up with winter maintenance. Snowplow convoys force massive speed reductions, so standard customs waits at places like Champlain or Windsor, they spike from minutes to hours.
Which adds, what, like 1 to 3 business days to a transit window?
Easily. But honestly, the physical weather delay is nothing compared to the documentation chokehold.
Okay, yes, let's talk about the paperwork.
Yeah.
Because the data integrity required for cross-border LTL right now is just unforgiving.
Unforgiving is the right word. A cross-border manifest isn't just a routing label, it is a binding legal tax document.
Right, so when a consolidated LTL trailer hits the primary inspection lane, the brokers are relying on this pre-submitted data, the PAPS in the U.S., or the PARs in Canada, to automate the clearance.
And the failure cascade begins when a single shipper on that consolidated trailer makes a typo.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If I mess up a zip code on a domestic package, I just call the carrier and fix it in transit. You're telling me a typo on cross-border freight literally parks a truck for days?
It literally does, because customs law is incredibly rigid.
Yeah.
The automated entry fails, and the carrier can't just unload the offending pallet at the booth and keep driving. The entire trailer is grounded.
Over one typo from one shipper.
Over one typo. We're seeing multi-day delays from incredibly basic failures. Things like vague descriptions where someone just wrote samples on the invoice.
Oh, geez.
Or mismatched weights between the bill of loading and the invoice. Or, most critically, missing HS codes.
The classification codes.
Yeah. A missing HS code immediately flags the shipment for a mandatory physical inspection by partner government agencies like the FDA or the CFIA in Canada.
So a 20-minute clearance turns into a multi-day administrative nightmare.
Exactly. And this environment makes specific Incoterms incredibly toxic.
Like DAP,
Right.
delivered at place.
Yes. The risk with DAP right now is immense. Because if a Canadian exporter ships DAP, they are assuming responsibility for getting the goods to the destination facility.
Right.
But if they don't rigorously verify that the U.S. buyer has fully prepped the customs entry and secured a broker, what happens? The truck hits the border, the duties are unpaid, and the freight is stranded.
And the Canadian exporter is stuck holding the bag.
Exactly. They absorb the liability, the demurrage charges, all of it. You just cannot dispatch freight under DAP in a volatile tariff environment, assuming the destination party has their paperwork together.
It's just too risky. But while the regulatory and operational environments are totally gridlocked, there is actually some good news.
Yes, the infrastructure upgrade.
Right. The physical infrastructure of the North American supply chain just got a massive, perfectly timed upgrade. The Gordie Howe International Bridge officially opened to commercial traffic a few weeks ago on July 27th.
And it is a game changer. It's a 6.4 billion Canadian dollar mega project. Took 8 years to build.
And it completely bypasses local municipal streets connecting Ontario Highway 401 directly to Michigan Interstate 75 Point, which is huge because the Windsor-Detroit corridor processes, what, like 30% of all bilateral truck trade?
Yeah, 30%. We are talking about $270 million in merchandise crossing every single day.
And for decades, this massive flow relied almost entirely on the Ambassador Bridge, which was built in 1929.
Right, which was a terrifying single point of failure for the region. Operating a highly integrated, just-in-time manufacturing network, especially the auto sector with one 1929 bridge, was just an unacceptable systemic risk.
Because any local security incident or weather event could just halt regional production?
Exactly. But the Gordie Howe resolves that single point of failure, and the market adoption was immediate.
It really was. In its first 5 days of operation, it took 4,100 commercial trucks. It instantly captured 44% of the total land crossings from Detroit to Windsor.
Which, of course, triggered a massive commercial battle.
Oh yeah, the bridge war. The Ambassador Bridge is fighting back aggressively. I saw a report from a trucking union official who disclosed that Stellantis, their FCA transport division, secured a flat-rate subscription contract with the Ambassador Bridge for $160,000 a month.
Regardless of total crossing volume.
Right. And they estimate it saves Stellantis $240,000 monthly. I mean, a monthly subscription model for a major international border crossing. That is like a Netflix or an all-you-can-eat buffet pass, but for 18-wheelers. It's incredible how infrastructure is turning into a massive corporate price war.
It really is a fascinating market adaptation. And, the publicly co-owned Gordie Howe Bridge operates under strict legal constraints from the U.S. government.
Oh, so they can't undercut the private bridge.
Exactly. They are legally blocked from dropping their toll rates below the average of comparable regional crossings. It prevents a publicly funded entity from utilizing state resources to crush a private enterprise.
So Gordie Howe has to compete purely on operational efficiency, speed, direct highway access, faster customs.
Right, rather than just predatory pricing. But ultimately, that corporate price war is secondary to the strategic value of the redundancy itself.
Having two bridges.
Yeah. Look at the economic damage from the 2024 to 2025 tariff cycles. Michigan lost 15,600 auto sector jobs purely due to trade friction disrupting their just-in-time supply chains.
Oh.
Having two state-of-the-art bridges insulates those production lines. If one bridge has a critical delay or an IT failure, the freight just seamlessly reroutes to the other one.
The assembly lines don't idle.
Exactly.
But with all these facts laid out, the tariffs, the freight surges, the LTL delays, the new bridges, how do logistics leaders actually adapt their strategies tomorrow to survive this?
Well, the broader mandate is recognizing that the era of hyper-optimized, low-cost, just-in-time North American logistics is definitively over.
It's done.
It's done. The new baseline requires risk-mitigated resilience. So tactically, companies are pivoting to direct LTL shipping.
What does that look like?
It bypasses intermediate cross-dock terminals entirely. The equipment that loads the freight at the origin facility is the exact same equipment that clears customs and delivers it.
So the paperwork and the pallets never get separated.
Precisely. They're also implementing strict 4-stage cross-border data validation audits. They literally physically lock the trailer at the origin terminal until a broker verifies that the invoice, the bill of lading, and the HS codes are perfectly aligned.
Because you have to force compliance at the dock door.
Right. Finding a paperwork error when the driver is in the customs lane is a critical failure. And operationally, shippers are aggressively locking in multi-year dedicated capacity contracts to guarantee equipment during the winter bottlenecks.
Okay, so that's the tactical side. What about the macro shift? Because there's a massive realignment happening with Mexico right now.
Oh, Mexico is brilliantly consolidating its USMCA advantage.
How so?
Well, while the U.S. and Canada are bogged down in these retaliatory tariff battles, Mexico strategically aligned itself with U.S. national security priorities. They imposed targeted domestic tariffs on Chinese industrial inputs to prevent transshipment.
So they played ball with the U.S.
Basically, they avoided the retaliatory counter tariffs and the provincial embargoes that are currently defining the U.S.-Canada dynamic. And the trade flow data illustrates the outcome perfectly.
Yeah, the numbers are wild. From January to November 2025, Mexico's U.S. imports grew 6%, reaching $492.5 billion.
Yeah. And over that exact same period, Canada's U.S. imports dropped 7% to $351.2 billion.
That's a massive divergence.
Mexico positioned itself as the preferred, low-friction regional partner simply by aligning its trade policy with the enforcement priorities of the U.S.
So what does this all mean for a supply chain manager waking up tomorrow on August 19th? Is Canada just permanently sidelined as a manufacturing partner?
No, Canada isn't out of the game. They command way too much raw industrial capacity and critical minerals for that. But the blanket security of the USMCA shield is totally gone.
Right.
The immediate mandate for managers is mapping out highly redundant alternate North American supplier networks, and they have to treat extreme origin compliance as a core operational competency, not just some back-office admin task.
Because failure to execute perfect documentation basically leaves a company exposed to catastrophic duty assessments.
Exactly. Adaptation in this regulatory environment is no longer optional. It is the sole mechanism for survival.
Wow. The transformation really is absolute. We've covered so much ground today, from how the invocation of an archaic 1930s statute bypassed modern treaties, to the freight panics, the breakdown of LTL networks under rigid documentation laws, and how the Gordie Howe Bridge arrives just in time to offer some much-needed physical redundancy.
It's a completely new reality.
It really is. The shift from efficiency to resilience is here. But as we wrap up this deep dive, there is a broader implication hanging over this entire structural shift that I want to leave everyone with.
What's that?
Well, if the United States can successfully weaponize an archaic, century-old domestic law to instantly bypass the foundational guarantees of a modern free trade agreement like the USMCA, what does this signal to the rest of the globe?
That is the big question.
Are we crossing the threshold into an era where international trade architecture is fundamentally meaningless, so long as a sovereign nation can just dig up a dormant domestic statute to override it? It's a profound operational and geopolitical risk to factor into your network planning. So examine your specific sourcing dependencies, pressure test your origin compliance, and prepare your operations for a North American market that has permanently changed the rules of engagement. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time.